I think the industry today is much different than when I first came into it. There's a lot more people doing it, first and foremost. The technology has become far more readily available. You know, when I was a kid, there was a big divide between people who were doing filmmaking work for a living and people who were doing it for a hobby. All right, my name's Colin Kennedy. I'm from Whittier, California. It's like 20 minutes east of downtown Los Angeles, a small, medium-sized suburb of LA. I am currently one of, I guess, a creative director at the Barracks. I specialize in the branded content arena. It's kind of a weird role. I don't have a role that's standard, I guess, amongst most media companies or production companies. I'm kind of like a creative director, but kind of not. I mean, I first got a camera when I was 15 years old, and it was a VHS-C camcorder. VHS-C is compact VHS. It's like a little format where there's a mini VHS tape that goes inside of a larger VHS tape, and then that would go in your VCR. I got that camera when I was 15. I'd saved up some money, and then my grandma had offered to foot the rest of the bill. Basically, we split the camera. And I'd say that was when I started actively participating in filmmaking and editing, because even though I got it primarily to shoot skateboarding, just like I think anybody else, once you have that tool, it wasn't like, well, if I'm not skating, it just sits in the bag. Like, there were plenty of times when I would just bring the camera out and like shoot stop motion of like Legos or other, just anything I could think of, like just to do creative stuff. And usually the end result still had something to do with skateboarding. Like, I would do like a title for like a video part, so it would be like a stop motion of someone's name in Legos. But there were other things, like I filmed, like, you know, once you have a camera, I think you're the guy that family events, they're like, hey Colin, can you film like your sister's, you know, musical performance at high school, or can you film this or that? So you know, immediately I was kind of, you know, shooting things and thinking about how I was shooting them. So that was probably, you know, subconsciously like my early filmmaking kind of experiences. My first industry job, I got hired as, I guess technically, an assistant editor at the age of 19. I wasn't necessarily qualified to get the job as assistant editor. What I was qualified as was, I guess, like a camera operator. But they saw the potential in the way that I guess I was shooting things, that I understood kind of the storytelling aspect of editing. And so they gave me an opportunity to edit. That was for a company at the time called 411 Video Magazine. It was like a VHS that skaters could buy at their local skate shop that would come out every other month. So 6 times a year, this hour-long VHS of highlights and segments and profiles and contest results and all of these things that had occurred in the previous 2 months, you know, would come out. So it was like a magazine, and that was my first industry job, I guess, officially. I had done some smaller things before that, but not for any money. You know, I'd filmed for a couple skateboard companies and supplied them with footage of their riders, but I wasn't really being compensated for that. That was my first like job. So I've only worked a few jobs in the industry, and each one there's been, you know, a calculated decision as to why I took it, aside from the first one at 411, which at that time, it's hard to explain, but that was like, you know, that'd be like being an industrial designer at like 19 and getting a job offer at like Apple, you know, like where it's like, that's your dream job. So at that time, when I got that job offer at 411, I didn't even see a future beyond that. I was like, I made it, like here I am, this is it, this is like the dream job. And it was. But after a few years of working in kind of that magazine format, which is really like fast paced and you're never working with the same people twice, you know, like 1 month you're working with this team and the next month you're working with this guy and this guy. I'd kind of longed to be a part of something that was more cohesive, like a team, something that like I could work with to help build the image of over a long term. So I decided to leave 411 and work for a shoe company called DVS. And at the time, DVS was still on its like upward trajectory. They had some really good riders, but they really hadn't hit their stride completely. And that was exciting to me, because it was like, rather than jumping onto something that was already fully established and already had a complete identity and was at the top of its game, I mean, that's cool to be a part of something like that, but I think it's better, or it's more exciting for me to get on when something's on its way there, because then you can kind of help guide it and shape it and be a part of what it is. And so when I left to go to DVS, that was part of the excitement, was I saw the potential with their riders and their team and their brand and the product they were making. I was like, damn, I want to be a part of this thing. This thing has the potential to be awesome. So when I went there, I didn't know how long it was going to be for, but I knew I wanted to make like a classic skate video, like the things that I grew up watching, which are our team videos. So my first 3 years of being at DVS essentially were like kind of getting my feet wet, getting used to the company, getting used to working with all the riders, and then starting on this video and then completing it a few years later. So I started working at the Barracks in January of 2011. So I had kind of had this history of working with Steve, not only at 4-in-1 and at DVS, but then when kind of my time at DVS was ending and I'd kind of done what I wanted to do there, Steve had really got the Barracks going. It had really hit its stride. It had been around for 3 years, I guess, and Steve was like, hey, I'm going to start doing more commercial work and kind of conceptual style skateboarding. And he had noticed that that's what I had started doing at my, the end of my tenure at DVS. I'd really switched from kind of traditional skateboard stuff to really doing like commercials and stylized pieces. And so he said, hey, if you want to continue that and work with more brands than just DVS, like at the Barracks, we're trying to work with a bunch of new brands, and I think there's an opportunity for you. So if you're interested, there's a place for you. I think the industry today is much different than when I first came into it. There's a lot more people doing it, first and foremost. The technology has become far more readily available. When I was a kid, there was a big divide between people who were doing filmmaking work for a living and people who were doing it for a hobby. But now, especially editing, dude, that's a whole other subject. But like the editing software back in the day was like, the price of a car. And now it's, the price of a few meals. So I think there's like been a huge kind of gap closure between the professional world and the consumer world. And so that's a big difference between when I started and now. I think there's more people who have the tools and the skills also to compete against you. I think the thing that would help anybody stand out now is similar to back then, is style. Anybody can learn the technical aspects of filmmaking, like how to operate a camera, how to control the light through shutter speed and, aperture and all that. That's all technical information. But what you can't kind of teach is like that style or that voice. That has to come from, I think, just experience. Two people can kick a ball, they're going to do it differently. Two people can shoot the same trick or make the same video, but they're not going to make it the same way. And not to say that one is going to be right and the other is going to be wrong. They're just going to be different. It's the ability to communicate your story. And so I think if kids or young adults were focusing more on like what it was that they wanted to communicate, like that feeling or that story or that vibe or whatever it is that they want to communicate, if they work on that first and foremost, the technical stuff and the good gear, that'll all come later, and once you get that, that'll just make you even a better filmmaker. But I think if you focus on like the story and the vibe and tone and getting that right, I think you'll be able to find a place for yourself.